Hi, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to San Francisco Camerawork tonight. My name is Michelle Branch, and I am the president of the board of San Francisco Camerawork. It's June 1st, which means that it's Pride Month, so I'm wishing everyone out there a happy and a glorious Pride. This month, we're launching a Pride Takeover featuring several LGBTQIA artists, and we have events with Jamil Halou, Guan Yu Zhu, and others. So please check out our Instagram feed and our website and stay tuned for more details, but I'm really excited about our Pride programming this month. So excited for that. As for tonight, Rodney Ewing is here, and I couldn't be more thrilled. He will be in a moderated conversation with Meg Shiffler, who is the gallery's director and chief curator for the San Francisco Arts Commission. And tonight we're hosting in a webinar format, and there will be a talk that's between Rodney and Meg, followed by an audience Q&A. And a little bit later, Christina Graber, who's our gallery manager, will talk to you about the Q&A and how that's going to be managed in this webinar format. Rodney and Meg have worked together on multiple occasions. Most significantly, Rodney contributed a newly commissioned work to the 2016-17 exhibition called Not Alone, exploring the bonds between and with members of the armed forces at the San Francisco Arts Commission Main Gallery, and that show was co-curated by Jason Hanasik and Meg Shiffler. For the conversation, Rodney and Meg will speak about Rodney's past and present projects, including Broken Shadows. Broken Shadows is an ongoing series that began during the 2020 mandatory shelter-in-place order in San Francisco, and it broadly references the positives and negatives of the silk screens that Rodney uses to create much of his work. What's also really great about Rodney, I'll say, is that he himself is an art teacher and a vocal advocate for artists. And for that reason, he's a really wonderful person to have here in our Bay Area artistic community. I hope that you'll have a chance to ask him some questions about the work that he does to support this community and really help to grow it and encourage other artists, because I think that's really spectacular and really significant about Rodney. And in San Francisco Camerawork specifically, we've been in conversation with Rodney, although we've known him, but we really began to be in greater conversation with him since our Instagram takeover last year in the wake of the onset of the pandemic, the killing of George Floyd and related protests, and have been involved with Rodney in terms of talks and also connecting with him around our auction. So before we begin, I'd like to welcome you again and to start with our land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land on which many of us call home and what is now called San Francisco. We are located on the stolen land of the Ohlone and Ramaytush peoples, to whom we owe a collective debt. We have all directly benefited from being settlers on this land, and I'm grateful. We would be happy if you would let us know where you're joining us from, its present name, and the name of the people who first lived there. And before we start, I'm going to introduce Meg Shiffler in a little bit, and then she's going to introduce Rodney. But I thought maybe Christina could jump in and kind of let us know how tonight's going to function in terms of the webinar format and how you can participate in the Q&A and in the talk.
Good evening, everyone. We're really glad to have you join us here tonight. As Michelle mentioned tonight, we're in webinar format, which I'm sure you all realize by not seeing yourself on the screen. But we still want you to interact and participate with us this evening. So please feel free to either put your questions directly into the chat, or you can put them into, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom, and you can ask your question in there, and we'll bring that up towards the end of tonight's presentation after Meg and Rodney have been in conversation with each other. Simple as that. And if you do have any questions, you can also feel free to message me directly. So thank you everyone for being here. I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Really appreciate that explanation. So as I was saying, Meg Shiffler is going to lead us tonight in conversation with Rodney, and we're really fortunate that she'll be here and she's here with us. So she is the gallery's director and the chief curator for the San Francisco Arts Commission. Every year, the San Francisco Arts Commission galleries feature works in diverse media by over 150 local, national, and international artists in curated exhibitions that center civic and social issues of our time. The galleries also manage an artist in residence program that places artists in city departments and in an international sister city traveling exhibitions program. Meg is a guest lecturer at regional universities. She was a faculty member in the School of Interdisciplinary Studies at the San Francisco Arts Institute, and is a member of the Creative Cities Working Group at Stanford. She has been a columnist for SF MoMA's Open Space blog. She's the author of Jeremy Fish, Oh Glorious City, and most recently was a contributing writer for Jim Marshall's Show Me the Picture. And the exhibition Jim Marshall's 1967, co-curated with Amelia Davis and originally produced at San Francisco City Hall, is going to be traveling throughout Europe in 2021-22. So congratulations to Meg and her collaborators on that. And prior to Meg's tenure at the Arts Commission, Meg worked in New York and Seattle as a curator, writer, researcher, and consultant, and she attended the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College in New York. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Meg, and looking forward to hearing the conversation tonight. Thank you again, Rodney and Meg, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michelle. That was a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And I really am grateful for the invitation to come and be here tonight. It's my honor to introduce wonderful artist and my friend, Rodney Ewing, who's a San Francisco-based artist. His drawings, installations, and mixed media works focus on the intersection of body and place, memory and fact, to re-examine human histories, cultural conditions, and events. In particular, how Black bodies have to navigate physical, social, and psychological space. With his work, he's pursuing a narrative that requires us to be present and intimate. His work has been exhibited at the Drawing Center in New York and locally at the Museum of the African Diaspora, Root Division, Jack Fisher Gallery, Nancy Toomey Gallery, Yukonam Gallery, Alter Space, Southern Exposure, the Arts Commission, and he currently has work up at SF MoMA in the exhibition Close to Home, Creativity in Crisis, and that'll be open and up until September 5th. So everyone that hasn't seen it has plenty of time to head on over to SF MoMA. He's been an artist in residence at Recology, the DeYoung, Jurassic, the Headland Center for the Arts, and Bemis Center for the Arts in Omaha, Nebraska. He received his BFA in printmaking from Louisiana State University and his MFA in printmaking from West Virginia University. Before I turn it over to Rodney, I want to just fill you in about how the evening is going to flow. We're going to be a little traditional tonight. Rodney is going to present for about half an hour, 40 minutes on his work, past work, and his current body of work. And then I'll send some questions his way and we'll start to have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I am very excited to pass to Rodney Ewing and look forward to watching your presentation along with everyone else.
Thank you, Meg. And thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Christina, and thank you, SF Camerawork, for having me here and allowing me to speak about my work. I'm just going to start sharing my screen with you a little bit here. So as I was thinking about how I was going to talk about my relationship to photography and how it impacts my practice, I really had to reflect on my interest and who I had been as an artist and what was my initial start with using, I guess you can call it archival images or appropriated images, but why was that attractive to me? And when did I start get together this thread? So it's been really fun sort of going back, looking at older work, and like going all the way back to graduate school for me, when I first started using these images in my printmaking practice. So thinking about my practice, I have a pretty multidisciplinary practice. Which I think is just a fancy word for with a lot of other artists do. We do a lot of different things. I consider myself also a topic-based artist, so that the medium that I use, it's always used to highlight the material or the topic or the person or the subject that I'm dealing with. I'm always looking for the best way to communicate ideas to the viewer. And for me, that has been sometimes using known or obscure images and putting them in new context so I can either talk about that particular subject or use that in conjunction with other materials to expand on a larger idea. And again, this started for me when I was at West Virginia University. As Meg said, I have a BFA and an MFA in printmaking. And one of the things that printmaking allowed me to, well, a lot of things that printmaking allowed me to do, first of all, it allowed me to expand on a drawing practice that I already had, which was beneficial to me. I was able to do a lot of different techniques, not only just make multiples, but find different ways to draw and express the line and address the picture plane. But it also allowed me to do things like Xerox transfers and photo silkscreen and photo etching, and sort of take advantage of, again, expanding my drawing practice and using existing images that maybe I would have used anyway. I just would have drawn them, but being able to use them, use the direct source, and then again, combining them with other materials, other pieces, and creating something new. So it's sort of like a writer who is, you know, trying to find the best and most eloquent use of language and descriptions and adjectives. As a visual artist, I feel like I'm doing the same thing. So going back to grad school, thinking about printmaking, I also wanted to expand how printmaking is used, or how I was using it, and as far as how it's being used, as how I could use it as a vehicle to talk about identity and race and memory and history. So this would have been the late 80s, early 90s. So I started looking at other artists who were using that particular medium or using maybe multiple mediums to expand their ideas, and where it's not that their media became secondary, but that idea in their medium became almost transformative. So so these are some people that I still look at today, and these are definitely people who definitely opened my eyes about how work could be made. So this was some of the early photography of Lorna Simpson. And what I really enjoyed about her work, and I still enjoy about her work, is that, especially the photographic work, is that the content was more than the actual process, had more weight than the actual process. Not to say that the photography component wasn't important of making a well-made photograph with everything that comes along with it, but how you can use it in a really conceptual way, and something that's not, that you have to sit with and read with. And that was something that was attractive to me to bring into printmaking, or just in general to my own practice. It's another one of her pieces. And fortunately, I also saw work by Carrie Mae Weems at this time. And this sort of opened my eyes to being able to go into archives and use archival material, and using it in a way that it probably wasn't intended to, but making your own, and again, transcending its use, and making a larger and broader narrative out of it. This is the work of Alfredo Yar. And he's another person that I still greatly admire, because he sort of crosses all these different disciplines. But the first work I saw for him was was Geography Equals War, and this piece right here called The Rushes. And the way he was able to, in some ways subtly, in some ways very overtly, make comments about the actual price of gold and the human cost of price of gold. So my first modern attempts, my first mature attempts at using archival material or using photographs. I know this may not look like photographs because they're not, but they're all based on photographs by Charles Moore. It was a book called Powerful Days. And I was working on a body of work called Rituals of Water. And Rituals of Water was responding to Hurricane Katrina, as I'm sitting there watching TV like many of us were. And for me, I'm looking at Black and brown bodies, again, being displaced by water. You know, transatlantic slavery, which brought many Black people here and around the world. Start thinking about baptism, sort of washing away what we had known before in place of something else. Definitely the civil rights movement, where water cannons were turned on to demonstrators and the civil rights activists. So I wanted to sort of demonstrate and really reflect on how this sort of sublime element had been used to displace Black bodies in different ways. So as I started doing my research around this, I know I wanted to cover various periods. I wanted to talk about transatlantic slavery. So within this body of work, there's a section about transatlantic slavery where I'm looking at images, where I used some images, some daguerreotypes, and I made paintings from them. Excuse me. And I looked very carefully at images, again, from Charles Moore and the civil rights movement, excuse me. And also looked at some modern images at the time from Katrina. But instead of just making or adopting the images as they were, making black and white paintings from black and white photographs, I wanted the medium, which is here is ink, water, and salt, to be conceptually tied to what I was talking about. So I wanted the bodies to look like they were made of or being washed away by water. And that's what you're seeing here in all these pieces. And then about the same time I was working on Rituals of Water, I started working on a body of work called Fact and Fiction. And I'm really involved in the narrative. I like the narrative a lot. I like digging through narratives probably about as much as I like researching old photographs and old images to use in pieces, and even pieces of text that you'll see in some of my work tonight. But I started questioning the relationship that people, or us as consumers of stories, had with individuals who actually existed in history, and those who were fictional and highlighted in fiction-based books and fiction-based literature. So I wanted to figure out a way to sort of bridge that. If I could bring those literary references to comment or to make nuanced sort of revelations about the individuals who are actually in these portraits. I thought this would be an interesting way to sort of retell our story and recast their story, and put it in a light that maybe people can understand. Because I've always felt that we hold on to fictional characters where they're more endeared to us than the people who've actually walked through history and had to go through some pretty horrific events. So again, this led me to create this body of work, Fact and Fiction. And so the two things that I did here that worked in conjunction was finding subjects and trying to find text that could parallel the story. So this is the image of a child soldier, and this particular piece of text is from William Golding's Lord of the Flies, and it's the section where the boys on the island are realizing that they can make their own rules and nobody's watching them. In total, I think between 2012 and 2016, I made 9 of these pieces. This is for Claudette Colvin. And the text is from Ashraf Fayyad's last line of the Refugee Descendants. Again, for this process, I'm using silkscreen. And again, I'm not using silkscreen in a way to make an addition. That wasn't the point for me to use silkscreen, but it felt like when I started researching their stories and finding their images, that it needed to be a printed image. And if I could use the squeegee as an extension of my drawing hand, then I was okay with that, as long as I could still find some way to push that image around and manipulate the image and have other sort of painterly and drawing like effects that go along with it. It's an image of Emil Griffiths. He was a middleweight boxer in the late 50s to the late 60s. And what I was most intrigued about in his story is that he accidentally killed a man in the ring, and towards his later years, Emil came out as being bisexual, and he had made this comment about more people accepted the fact that he killed somebody in the ring than they would accept his individuality. So I remembered this this line from Ursula K. Le Guin's Planet of Exile, and there's a line in the book where she says, or one of the characters says, what is hard is to keep alive in a world you don't belong to. And I felt that sort of encapsulated Emil's experience. Henrietta Lacks, her genetic material was stolen and abused for years without her permission or that of her family's. I felt that way that the line from Milton's Paradise Lost, which was also supposed to be the prologue for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And so I was sort of thinking about it in that context. And the line is, did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from the darkness to promote me? I felt like that was just appropriate to her situation, not only her situation, but a lot of medical experimentation that was done to African Americans without their consent. So moving forward, so I'm kind of working on a little bit of a timeline here, from my earliest work to my most recent work. The Fillmore. The Fillmore as a place that has a history of displacement from the Japanese American community that lived there up until World War II, where the citizens had to relinquish their homes and their businesses and were placed into internment camps. Then the African Americans who moved in afterwards, who were then displaced years later due to urban renewal and redlining. I felt that there wasn't a lot of work that sort of reflected that intersection. So I created a body of work called Untethered. And for this, it called for a lot of research. This was also a project, it was a 2-person project that I did with my friend, the painter Monica Lundy. We created 2 separate bodies of work. But there was one point we did a lot of research together. And so we would go to the main public library and go to their archives and look through their archives and find these photographs that that the library had acquired. And with this body of work, using silkscreen in a way where, and Photoshop, where I could combine two different images, because I know I wanted to not only have that conceptual intersection, but I also wanted to have that physical intersection on the page. So what you're seeing here is some young women, Japanese women in the internment camp, trying to, you know, be normal as much as they can. And in the background, this is a map of Tule Lake, where they were staying. Always, rather, where they were interned. I also wanted to try to bridge the gap of time and space a little bit by finding images of people who may have lived in the same neighborhood but at different times. So again, these are all silkscreen. And again, using the silkscreen in a way like I'm drawing. Of course, I want the image readable, but at the same time, I wasn't afraid to have it rough or being manipulated, or even going in behind it and manipulating it again, like just like I would a drawing or a painting. Another piece from the Untethered series. And also with this body of work, even the colors that accompany it, even with, you know, keeping the key images, the silkscreen images in black and white, but also trying to accompany the work with very old colors or dated colors or things that looked aged or something, you know. It's so for me, it was an aesthetic choice, but it was also a conceptual choice as well. This is called haints. Haints is a Southern word for haunted or ghost. And there was also a process with when I was working here that at one point I had maybe 20 or 30 images, and I had to sit there and select what images that I wanted to merge together and what images sort of fit together or work well together. So these are two images that I found again at the main public library. It's two African-American GIs, and sort of floating within them is a picture of these two sisters, these two Japanese sisters. So sort of pushing and pulling them using Photoshop. So there's pieces of them that fade in. There's pieces of them that that merge together, and there's pieces of them that at one point one body sort of makes up the other. And again, so that's more of me wanting to have that intersection and sort of collapse that time and space. Also from Untethered. So here I found a photograph in the archives. There was a West Indian cricket team that existed at some point in the history of San Francisco. And the map that surrounds them, that goes through them, or cuts through them, is from the redevelopment agency. And it sort of marks where places in the Fillmore and the Western Addition were going to be moved from. And much like what I did with the Rituals of Water pieces, where I was manipulating and not just taking these straight photographs, even with these, I'm interested in, when I had them in Photoshop, using tools and filters in Photoshop that sort of reminded me of things I would do if I was drawing them. So in some sort of way, some manner, I'm digitally drawing as I'm going along. Another piece from that same series. And so this sort of brings me to the work I did about this time last year, Broken Shadows. And to put it in some context, Broken Shadows sort of responds to, I'm a big Ornette Coleman fan. Secondly, it refers to sort of the process of using silk screens where, you know, I send in a positive, it gets made into a negative, I pull ink through the screen, and I make it a positive again. So having these sort of this idea of like broken shadows and making shadows, making things whole, was a really intriguing title to me. And so Broken Shadows started out very simply, which was I had to keep busy. Like many of us during shelter in place, I was home doing a lot of Zoom, working from this space, teaching, not really going out doing other than to, you know, basic necessities and going to buy food. And there was the first couple of weeks of the pandemic where I found it very difficult to like leave my house. I was getting to the same routine over and over again. And I sort of had to break that habit. And I knew I was going to do some kind of body work based on what these images are printed on, which is old ledger paper. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it, but once the pandemic hit, I was sort of forced to sort of live with this idea of like I could sit here and waste my time and do nothing, or I could take advantage of the fact that I am pretty much home all day, even while I'm teaching, and I can make work. So I gave myself the assignment, for lack of better words, was to make a new piece every day and a half. And I wish I could show you, but I have a large collection of art silk screens that I've archived. I don't wash out my old silk screens, I keep them. And so I've probably got 80 or 90 silk screens in my studio. And I wanted to see if I could use these silk screens that were all made for different projects, very specific projects, over the course of maybe the last 10 years, and see if I could use them in different combinations to still talk about, again, things that I'm concerned with about diaspora, about African-American existence, about, again, about memory and identity. And I started making these pieces every day and a half, using the old ledger paper, combining the ledger paper, and making pieces as big or as small as I wanted. Some of the ledgers had writing in them that I was able to use as a backdrop. The writing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the images. And also being able to draw back into pieces and sort of make substrates that I could print upon. And this brings me to my current body of work, which is called Planned Obsolescence, which I just started a couple of months ago. And I'm using much of the same process that I did for Broken Shadows, except I'm actually having new silk screens made. And these silk screens will all be talking about, these pieces rather will all be talking about how the Black body has been used by different types of industry, that is exploited by different types of industry. And I'm sort of doing the research as I'm making the work. And so technique-wise, again, I'm using silk screen, and I'm actually drawing back into the pieces as well. And so for me, this journey of using photographic images, I feel like it's still something very new to me. It's, I think thanks to sort of like people pointing it out and thanks to institutions like Camerawork, I've had to sort of really reflect on why I'm using these images, what I'm doing, and really thinking about where I'm going with this. And and I've come to the conclusion that it's just part of my practice, part of my multidisciplinary practice. Am I always going to be using images this way? Am I always going to be incorporating found images, or even taking my own photographs and using them in some way? Probably, but maybe not for every piece I do. Again, my biggest concern is finding the best vehicle to convey some of these really complex and a lot of times uncomfortable ideas to the viewer, so that we all can think. I have to think as I'm making them, and I definitely want the viewer to think as they're viewing them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rodney. That was amazing. It was so fun to see your new body of work and have you share that out. That was such a treat.
Okay.
I had such a good time at your studio, and I want to run back quickly to the conversation that we had about choosing images. And I just took a look at who is participating tonight, who's with us, took a look at the list, and it's a majority of artists. So I'm going to ask some process questions and little technical, but also get a little deeper into some aspects of your background and how it brings you to the subject matter that you work with. So let me start with something a little more technical. When we were at your studio, you mentioned that you're drawn to portraits and group shots that really bring out a sense of humanity in the subjects, and that most often you want to provoke empathy in some way. This word empathy is really interesting. It came up a couple times when we were talking. So how does that play when you're doing your research and when you come across, archives of images? How do you choose the one? And what criteria do you use for that selection? Not the story, but the actual image. What is it about that image? And because you use your images over and over and over again too. It's usually not just like one time when you choose something. It's a powerful choice because it becomes part of what you call your image library. And so let's talk about choices.
I think when I started being aware of that kind of choice was definitely when I was working on the untethered body work, the body work about the Fillmore and Western edition. When I had, again, at one point I was just taking images. It's like scanning images, having them send me files. And once I figured out how I was going to use them, instead of having them as like an image of this person, an image of this group, started thinking about what would happen if I brought them together, and what kind of story that those two images together could tell that maybe I hadn't thought of, maybe that somebody else hadn't thought of either. And so how can these two images support each other, especially with that project? Because since I'm talking about these very same history of being displaced from a neighborhood, and how do I highlight both their stories with making sure that I don't leave anything out? So I think when I think about brothers and sisters, the ones with the two African-American soldiers and the two Japanese girls, like there was a certain, I relate to the military guys from my father being in service and from my being in the service, and there was something about the way that the two of them were standing together, and the way the two girls were standing together, and there was a certain comfort level, and there was a certain body language that they both shared, and I just felt like, okay, that's a match. Well, okay, put those two together, and I went on to the next piece and just started a process of, like, again, using that same criteria. How can they support each other?
Yeah.
And when I'm using individual images, it's always, if I'm using an image, like, what else can I do to support that image? What else can I do to support that story? And that also becomes very important in my process.
Sometimes when you see an image that's like perfect, then do you have to go hunt for the image that you're going to collage with it? Like, you know exactly what that image needs, and then you have to go find it? Or is it really a process of having lots of options and then matching and seeing what feels right?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I didn't show any of that work. Also during last year, I was working on a collaboration with the artist Tahiti Pearson.
Oh yeah.
And he does these amazing designs and all hand cut into paper, into canvas. And so we were supposed to do this collaboration together at one point in at Space Program SF, and because of the pandemic, we couldn't, so he would mail me things. So when he would mail me his end of the collaboration, these beautiful cuts, I would sort of like just sort of lay screens on top of them and just sort of look at them, and then I would go do something else and come back like, that'll work, and like that looks good, but maybe not quite. And you know, it's almost like sometimes with that work, it was like a call and response. Like, okay, here's just something that's already made in front of you. What else are you going to do? What else do you want to say with it? What are you responding to? Am I responding to color? Am I responding to design? And what does that all say to me? What does that all mean to me? And then again, just sort of laying down images, laying down screens, and seeing how I can sort of complete the conversation that he and I have started.
I think that's a good segue to the next question. And I think about your work in terms of, I don't know, absence and loss and erasure and legacies. There's something about, in a lot of your bodies of work, about what's missing from the history books, what went missing, or what was intentionally erased. And so the physical embodiment of that in your works, where you're layering things on top of each other until things start to disappear or meld into each other. Or with Tahiti's work, it's a cut pattern paper, you know, sort of laying on top of something that sort of looks like my fingers, and then you lay an image on top. There's literally holes in it. There's literally missing pieces of it. And so there's this quote that I pulled of yours. You say, the concepts of departure, wandering, and disappearance are part of the African-American culture since slave time. And then you say, what happens if all physical trace of your ancestors has been removed? This absence, this trace is gone, whether it's from the Fillmore or much, much, much further back than that. So the question is, are you creating traces? Are you feeling responsible in your studio to actually create new traces that point to these stories and people? And what does that responsibility feel like? Does it feel like responsibility?
It does now, dang.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's okay. I'm messing with you. No, at some point, I think when you invest in any kind of art practice, or any kind of, within that art practice, you're investing in any kind of body of work or any thematic work, there is a responsibility. I think there is a responsibility. I know I feel a responsibility to people who don't know that history. And I want to sort of, again, you were talking about empathy earlier, you know, to engage their empathy into also engage a part of them the part of them that wants to learn. And I want to do it in a manner that is slow and subtle, and again, sitting in front of a piece and taking in the information. So, and again, thinking about information, I'm thinking about how do you take that really difficult information and make art about it. And there's been cases where I thought, you know, should I be doing this? Should I be making, should I be talking about these things? And especially, you know, as it pertains to African-American culture in history. But always come back to like, how do I make that difficult accessible? And we talked about a little bit about this in our studio visit, and I think there's a difference between making something accessible and making something acceptable. I'm not trying to make anything watered down or even insult the viewer's intelligence. I'm trying to sort of hold up my end of a very long art historical conversation when it comes to doing work like this. And there is a responsibility of me sort of like leaving these traces. And again, I am fully aware that I'm not the only person who's doing this kind of work currently, or is any, there's also a lot of shoulders I'm standing on when it comes to making this type of work, and that has allowed me to do this kind of work. So there is a responsibility, and I kind of embrace this responsibility because it's giving me that community of other artists that I'm in community with right now, or other artists that I haven't met, but I feel like I'm in a broader community with them. And ultimately my goal for the viewer is also to bring them in that community of knowledge. So, yeah.
Wow, this was actually the last question I was going to ask you, but I'm going to go a little out of order because you just started touching on something. So Camerawork is and I want to go back to talking more about the photographs themselves, but that was such a great segue to this question. Camerawork is in the process of finding a new ED, and I'm getting ready to open the Arts Commission galleries in the fall. And a lot of institutions, small and large, have been on a fast track of learning over this last year, learning and listening and reading and figuring out what the new institutional responsibilities and models are. And they're not new, to be honest with you. What are the actual responsibilities that we need to take on? And one of the phrases that I've been really interested in, just in the last few weeks, I've been chewing on this difference between transactional versus transformative in relationship to creating exhibitions, nurturing relationships with artists, and building trust with various communities. And you were just talking about relationships as well. You were talking about relationships with artists. And, during your presentation, you were saying how it's even more important to stay connected at this moment in time and hope that those connections will continue. So my question to you is about moving from transactional relationships. Well, got invited to be in a show. I brought my work. They paid me. I come to the opening. People see it. This is very old mode of operation, right? A transformative relationship goes beyond that. And what does that mean for you? What do you want from your relationships moving forward with other artists, with communities that you might engage for a project, or an institution that you might be working with? How can this new landscape be supportive of you and you supportive of the landscape? You got me. It's a long question, it's a long drawn out question, but
No.
What are you thinking about in those directions now that maybe have shifted or changed in the last year?
I think the the first thing that comes to mind is sustainability. What happened, or what is still happening within minority, community, BIPOC communities, and not even within the arts, is like we're talking about sustainable justice, sustainable representation, and weaving these things into everyday practice. For me, that's what it looks like. It looks like that's the first thing that I think I would like to see. Just not only as an artist, but just this as a person. When I go to a museum or I go to a gallery or any kind of cultural event, is that it doesn't become the odd thing or the transactional thing, as you're saying, that have this one or this one thing, where it becomes part of our vocabulary, our language, where there's an extension of what's going on in a museum that extends past the museum or past the gallery, and then go, or past any kind of cultural institution that goes in back into the community, into the neighborhood. It makes people feel welcome to be in these spaces. I know a lot of friends of mine, we talk about feeling like we're not welcome in certain spaces. Our ideas aren't welcome, our art's not welcome unless, again, it's this transactional thing where it becomes partisan trend becomes viral, it becomes profitable. Whether it's young artists, young African-American artists now, or, this is sort of like this double-edged sword, young African-American artists and the generation or two generations that came before them are very much in trend, but it's like, that's great. I love seeing all this work. I love seeing all this work being by these artists that I grew up with. I grew up looking at and admired and seeing their works in these bigger and larger spaces. And I love seeing this new group of younger artists who are like in their 20s and 30s and their work being recognized. But what I don't want to see is that that's all it is. That's all it is this transactional experience, this transactional trend. And then, like 6 months from now, 6 years from now, and it's like, nobody's feeling this work anymore. And so, to me, I like to call institutions like, what are they going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah.
How they understand the problem, they understand why these conversations need to happen. They understand, hopefully they're understanding the value of these works and the value of not just having a single story. And how does it become part of their everyday practice to include different voices and from different people and different walks of life, into collections, into exhibitions, and also having, if when possible, having these people speak about this work. So whether I participate in that personally or whether I get to see that, it kind of doesn't matter. But to me, it's the overall ethos of like the way things have been done doesn't really serve anybody. It only serves like a kind of a rarefied group of people, and it doesn't do anything for the community. So that really just has to change, and that's kind of the institutions and the programs that I would like to participate in.
That was so great. Thank you, Rodney. That was wonderful. I just in response to that, I think, what you're talking about is a really powerful, or let me know if this is what you're talking about. Moving past an institution or collectives or residency, diversity, inclusion, and equity statement, and the checklist at the end of the year of what they've shown and who they've shown. I feel like that's sort of the moment that we're in, where there's accountability via a public statement and a checklist. And so this accountability that you're talking about, and this idea of building meaningful relationships beyond that transaction, beyond that statement, and that sort of data accountability is actually fits right in with your emphasis on empathy, on be truly understanding each other through a mechanism of an artistic practice or engagement. And man, I hope that's where we're all moving.
Yeah, hopefully. I understand those checklists that you're talking about, and those have to be, people have to be held accountable to make sure things don't start slipping, like, oh, it's not raining anymore, we don't need the umbrella. It's like, no, we actually really do. We still need to be prepared. But I think the end goal for all of us is this just becomes this organic process. This becomes a natural process where, that inclusion door is a little bit wider. It's a lot wider, and and those partnerships last long, long beyond not having your work on the wall and participating in panels and things like that.
By the way, if you're visiting us tonight for this event and you're not watching the comments in the chat, I would encourage you to do that. There are some great comments being put up in the chat. So thank you for doing that, and everyone should be keeping an eye on that as well. When we were right at the end of our studio visit, you were about to get onto a Zoom call with, I forget who it was, an international artist that you had met during a residency, is that correct? And you were beginning to stew and continue to plan something that didn't come into works during the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you see your process actually being more globally inclusive and collaborative than it used to be, because we're all more familiar with Zoom and more familiar with this idea of generating ideas through this digital, forum. So I wondered if you could talk to me about that meeting that I just butted up against, and any exciting plans you have moving forward with artist collaborators.
Yeah, so there's actually two different collectives that overlap. So I've been a member of the 3.9 Art Collective since, God, we've been around for almost 11 years.
Yeah.
And then a little bit, I think over a year ago, there was an event at Caddis of the Native American Art Department. And this individual, Jason Lujan, who was part of that, didn't just want to drop into San Francisco and sort of use up all the artistic resources. He wanted to be able to talk to other artists, and he wanted to really talk to collectives. So he talked to myself and a couple other members of 3.9. He talked to some other members of like Borderline and some other collectives. And he invited us, at the end of these conversations, he invited us to be, have our publications in his show at Caddis. And we kind of all, we all went to the opening of that event, all these different collectives. And Jason just said something really simply one day. He just said like, yeah, you guys should do this again. You guys should all get together again. And so we did. And so we had another meeting in Caddis, then we had another meeting in Caddis. And it's like, then there was one of the people there said, we should have like a collective of collectives booth at like an art fair. It's like, oh, why don't we just plan our own art fair? And then COVID hit. So we had all these elaborate plans, and we're bringing people on board. And so that idea sort of got pushed off, but out of that became Collective Genesis, which is 3 different collectives that have come together. And so we have had events. We had a Labor Day event this past Labor Day where we did projections around the city of different members' artworks in different storefronts that we had. So Southern Soldiers used their space. We had private homes, from here all the way out to the avenues that we projected this work. And we had a map, and so people could travel around the city, since people couldn't go to indoor art events,
yeah.
Or even like large outdoor ones for that matter. This is a way that people could see things in their neighborhood, or they could drive around the city and be able to see these pieces of artwork. So, and then within 3.9, working with this same individual, Jason Lujan, he invited us to do a video piece based on the word, based on a prompt, protection spells. And so 3.9, we just started thinking about what words are we using to protect ourselves, what methods did we use to protect ourselves. So 5 members in the group, we made individual videos that will be shown as one, and this will be shown at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto starting this month. So yeah, I've always enjoyed collaborating with 3.9. We've done a lot of stuff together over 11 years. We probably do at least 1 or 2 projects together every year, and then joining Collective Genus with 2 other collectives. And sometimes we're not even talking about art. Sometimes we're just hanging out. And that's important, just to be able to talk and support each other, and see how each other are doing. And yeah, so there's we actually had a talk through as a public library about the importance of collectives and how do you form a collective and what are the benefits. And again, I think there's something more powerful about being in an arts community or being an arts collective and getting together with like-minded people so that to generate your own projects and your own ideas. And just having, you know, one or two or three more bodies to sort of shoulder that responsibility, that creative weight. And you know, I'm kind of a lifelong learner. And I'm assuming other people are too. And you get to learn, you know, skills and ideas from other people. And it's, you know, and it's just kind of refreshing, kind of amazing. And again, supportive.
Congratulations to you and 3.9 for the Toronto show. That's really exciting. And I see some of your 3.9 friends who have come tonight. So I know you're out there. Congratulations. So I have about, you know, 6 more questions, and each of those questions has 6 questions within the 6 questions. But I really think that was a great, so many questions. we should have a question and after party.
Yeah.
Just keep it going. I did have more specific questions about, I'm going to ask this one, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I really want to, I hope the Q&A keeps going with this idea of artists and community transactions, all of that. But I'm going to pull it back to a photo place just for one more second, just because we're at Camerawork. So here's the question. Do you always know who the photographer is of the images that you use? How and when do you consider the photographer and the circumstances in which the images were taken to be relevant to your final piece? Always? Or sometimes is a great image just a great image? And how does the position of the photographer, the position that the photographer occupies, this is a big question in, you know, photography history, whether they're part of a community or on assignment from outside, whether that matters, or whether you're pulling the image from its original context into your work. So you're sort of separating it from that anyway, and then it becomes its own individual image once it enters your image library. So this is all about reference back to the original photographer and the original context in which it was created, and how you consider that when you pull it into your own library.
I think the first body work I think of is the Rituals of Water, especially when I got into using or borrowing the work from Charles Moore, or being inspired by the work of Charles Moore. And, you know, I made no bones about the origins of those photographs. I would never want to obscure that photographer's name, because I mean that book is revealing in so many different ways. And so in that instance, I knew that medium, and why I was using the medium that way conceptually, was going to be able to support the work that he did when he was on the ground photographing those events. And I knew simultaneously it could support the added intention. I wouldn't say new intention, but the added intention I had for painting that way. So in that case, it was very important that I knew where those photographs came from. For the Untethered series, a lot of those photographs, there was this no, you didn't know who the photographer was, because some of those were old family photographs that had been given to the library for preservation.
That's the Fillmore archive, just in case people aren't following. Yeah.
And for preservation, because there was nobody else to hand those photographs off to. So I don't think I felt like less responsibility with that. I felt, in some cases I even felt more, because those were, that's history, that's somebody's personal history, or that personal reflection. And I wanted to make sure, again, that I was honoring the original intention, and also adding another intention that I guess what I'm worried about is what I often consider and I worry about. I want to make sure that I'm not just turning it into some blank object. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you asked me like, is a great photo a great photo? It's like, yeah, sometimes a great photo is a great photo, but I have to have a purpose. I have to have a purpose for redrawing that image or making a silk screen of that image and using it in a different context. There has to be something larger than myself of why I'm doing that. And I think I don't think I would want to work in any different way. So those things are really important to me. And yeah, I never want to find myself in a situation where I'm just appropriating a photograph. I don't mind if it's like some base device, like, you know, a piece of machinery, or in one of the images I had an image of an old punch card. Like, those things are can be supportive.
Yeah.
Those are inventions, but people have a history. They have a past. They had aspirations and intentions, and so all of that has to come to bear when all that has to be thought of in my head when I'm using that. And if I don't have a really good reason for using it, if I don't have if I can't see past it, if I don't think I can see an aesthetic reason, then I should probably leave it alone for a while.
That makes perfect sense to me, because you don't like work that really, or like the media that perpetuates polarization. You live and your work really in the complicated area of the gray space. And that means that you have to have a lot of intentionality. And so that makes perfect sense about your use of images and your very, very careful intentionality. So thank you. I'm gonna go ahead. Christina, I see a few questions. There aren't an overwhelming number of them, so I'm gonna go ahead and call out a few of them. Ron Saunders says, or asks,
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ron. Are all of your series ongoing? If not, how do you decide when they're finished?
I think Broken Shadows is done, but it sort of moved into planned obsolescence. And I think the difference between planned obsolescence and Broken Shadows is like planned obsolescence is very pointed. And like, I'm looking for very specific images of Black bodies in relation to industry. And yeah, and there'll be a point where I sort of reached the apex of that work, just like when I felt like I reached the apex of Broken Shadows, like, okay, I kind of felt organically, this is done. All right. But there's certain techniques I used, the ledger paper, making paper of my different sizes. I'm doing more handwork in planned obsolescence, where I'm actually going in with different materials and the silk screen to sort of push that visual plane. And there'll be a certain point where that's done as well.
I think it's really interesting, just on a side note, that you're moving into a series about broadly, if I can say, correct me if I'm wrong, but about racism and capitalism.
Yeah.
Right when the world is opening up, when business is opening up, and we might experience a boom of some kind. And it's just, the timing of it is really interesting. Nate asks 2 questions. When did you know you were a photographic artist? And what is your opinion of Richard Prince?
I still don't think I'm a photographic artist.
I knew you were going to say that.
I still feel like there's so much of photography I really don't understand, but there's a lot of things within that I really admire. Who knows? Like, maybe I'll sort of evolve to the point where I and taking my own photographs and using them in a way that makes sense to me. And Richard Prince, yeah, there's some powerful images within his work. I'll just off the top of my head, I just have to say I enjoy his work. I'm sorry, I can't get any deeper than that about Richard Prince's work, but yeah, I feel like I haven't seen everything, but what I've seen of the work is I think there's something very painterly about Richard Prince's work, and the way he sets up compositions and the use of surrounding color in his compositions that again you have to sit with for a while and think about what you're looking at.
Yeah. There's a question that I'm going to paraphrase in the chats from Diane Keene, and she's asking about how you feel about white artists taking on Black trauma in their work. And it's an interesting question because especially in photography, it's a long history of this. And yeah, it's the question becomes more interesting to me in the photo context than it is just in the big overarching art world context, which is there's a million ways to answer that question, I think, but your take on it in however you want to approach it is what's being called for.
Again, I think it can be done. I think anytime you're documenting visually or theatrically, musically, or even literary, you're witnessing or telling somebody else's story, that you could really go down this rabbit hole and make yourself the center about this is what I saw and this is what I'm feeling, and this is what's going on with me as I do it, which is at some point you can sort of, it makes sense for you to sort of process that as an individual. But I think when you come to that output, it still has to be larger than yourself. So
yeah,
you really have to put those subjects first, and you really have to be responsible about how you're presenting that information. And as we've seen with certain artists over the couple of years, that some people are really good at it and they understand why they're painting or drawing or writing, whatever where they're processing about somebody else's culture, and they do it really well because they've done the work, they've done the research, and like you said, there's a great intentionality about it, and it's not about them, and it works. And then you've seen on the other hand where some people just thought, oh, that was a really cool image, that's a really shocking image, and I'm just going to paint that. And there's no sense of responsibility about how they use that image, and it was clear there was no thought about how that was going to impact that community.
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier, you would need to really look for that deep and real engagement between the artist and the community or individual that's being represented, and what that relationship looks like, and what that conversation is like, and how it's represented, and who's centered and how they center it. It's a lot of moving parts, but I think that it can be accomplished, but there's a great responsibility there that you've outlined beautifully. Yeah. Anyone else have questions? I think that, Christina, do you see any questions? I think that I've hit the ones in the chat and in the Q&A. We'll just hold for a second before we move to end. All right. I think I'm going to pass back to Christina, but before I do that, let me ask Rodney, is there anything that you'd really like to throw out there before? Oh, here's a great question. This is a great last question. Rodney, what advice do you give your students who want to be artists?
You know, depending on what their medium is, and you know, I teach middle school kids, so some of them are involved in photography, some of them are involved in drawing and painting. I tell them, I just tell them to practice. Like, yeah, it's great that you do the assignments that I tell you to do in school and that you excel at them, but you know, what are you doing when you're not here? What are you doing when not in class? And I have, you know, I'm proud to say I have a group of students that that do a lot of work outside of class, and for me, I just say, just make a lot of stuff. Just keep making work, and wherever your interest sort of pulls you, you know, especially at that age, you know, they don't have to make up their mind if they're like, I'm only going to be a painter, I'm only going to be an installation artist, I'm only going to be a sculptor. You know, like, do all those things, and then, you know, that's all cool stuff that you can put in your toolbox and carry it with you for life. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Rodney. I have deep respect for you and really, really, really look forward to this next body of work that you're making. Can't wait to see it when it comes out of the studio finished.
Okay.
I think I need to pass back to Christina now. And but before I turn off, I want to thank everyone who came tonight. I wish I could see all your lovely faces and say thank you face to face, but we'll all be in rooms together soon. And I really look forward to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Meg. As always, it's always such an honor and a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm glad this is recorded, so now I can like play it back and like all these really great nuggets that you keep dropping, and I can like remember them this time.
Back at you.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Meg, and thank you, Rodney. Yeah, lots of great nuggets. This was incredibly inspiring, and my video is off, but my face was like up in the camera, trying to catch every moment as you guys were speaking, because it was just so inspirational. So thank you both so much for being here tonight. It was really special to learn more about your work, Rodney. And I really appreciated the very important questions that you both spoke about the role of artists in our communities, the role of art institutions in this moment, and how we can make our communities a space for transformation. So a big thank you to both of you. And a big thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. Yeah, lots of artists, lots of members of our community out there, which was so great to see. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing the space with us. And with that, I'll hand things over to Michelle to close us out.
Oh, thanks, Christina. I think you said it all really well. It's just a really great opportunity to see two people who've worked together before and know each other well in conversation, and for you to be able to kind of converse in this way. So I think it's really wonderful. Rodney, thanks for everything that you do in the Bay Area arts community. I've always been really impressed with, you know, the work that you've done to lift up and support other artists. And it was exciting to hear about your work with 3.9 Collective as well, you know, in addition to your own practice, which was great to hear about and see new work. And Meg, thank you so much for being such a wonderful contributor and collaborator and partner, you know, in San Francisco to bring the work of artists to life. So, and it's been, your work has been so inventive and creative in and of itself. So we really appreciate you being here. So thank you so much. I want to thank our audience, and I hope that you're all doing well and are healthy, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye, you guys.
Bye. Thanks for joining.